the Napoleon pastry. There is some unclear history about the origin of this classic French pastry. It's pretty funny to read about some of the theories of how this amazing pastry originated. Obviously, it's called a Napoleon, also known as a millefeuille. And what is millefeuille? Mille is 1,000 leaves, because we are using puff pastry as the base of this cake. It's basically, well, actually, look, it's right on the cover. That's a Napoleon right on the cover of this Pepperidge Farm puff pastry sheets. Now, this is a vegan product, so we're okay there. Now, some of you right away might be going, oh my God, I can't believe you're not showing us how to make the actual laminated puff pastry dough recipe. Well, that is something in and of itself, and maybe we'll visit that after we finish this classic cake series. But for now, we're going to just use the store-bought Pepperidge Farm puff pastry. It's really a very great product. It works beautifully. And it comes in 2 packages of what I just opened here. So this is one, and then it has another one inside. So it comes in these sheets and it's folded up like this. But I'm going to actually cut along the folds, because I always make my Napoleon pastry in sort of strips rather than full cakes, mostly because this thing is a nightmare to cut once it's all said and done. I mean, this is an absolutely delicious pastry to make, but if you're gonna try to cut this as a full cake, good luck, because it's an absolute nightmare. So we're going to be baking the puff pastry strips like this. I am going to dock them with a fork just to kind of make some steam vents. And if you've ever seen anybody do this cake before, you may see that they won't even do the docking with the fork, and they'll just place another sheet pan right over top of this and bake it like that, which basically prevents the puff pastry from puffing. I don't like to do it that way. I like to let it do its thing and let it rise to its full potential. And then when I go to assemble the cake, I'll sort of, I don't want to say mash it down, but you'll see when I start to build this whole cake. I just like to do it that way. People who like to do the sheet pan method and not let it rise up, I don't know. I don't like the way that it looks. It doesn't allow the puff pastry to be flaky and airy the way that it's supposed to be. So I'm going to do it this way. Comment below if you've done it the other way or if you've seen it done the other way. And what else? So it's just so easy to make. If somebody commented when I put this picture out on my Facebook page, sort of giving a preview of what's to come in this Classic Cakes Veganized series. And one person said, wow, that looks really difficult to make. And it's really not. It is so easy to make. We are implementing the diplomat cream again, which is basically pastry cream that has been fortified with agar as a thickener, and then we're going to fold in some vegan whipped cream, and that's the filling of a classic Napoleon pastry. It's basically puff pastry and diplomat cream layers. So it's really not as difficult as it looks, but there are a couple of secret tips and tricks that I'm going to show you along the way so that you do have success and ease in preparing this amazing cake. So I'm going to put this into my preheated 400-degree oven, and it's only going to bake for about 15 minutes. So let's do that, and then we're going to make the diplomat cream. I sort of gently pressed down because we don't want them to be big fluffy pillows when we are assembling this Napoleon cake. So I'm just sort of, like breaking up that pastry by myself. You're still gonna have those beautiful flaky layers, and that's enough for me, is to just kind of like pop it down a little bit myself. So we're gonna let that cool, and now we have to make the diplomat cream. Okay, so I have my sugar here, in a small mixing bowl. I urge you, when working with cornstarch in your recipes, to really use a scale. People will complain that their custard or their cheesecake, if you're following my recipe for cheesecake, comes out like rubber, and they don't know why. Well, that's because of the way that you're measuring cornstarch. I do always offer both measures of volume, spoons, and scale weight, but for cornstarch, I really urge you to do the scale weight, because believe me, measure a tablespoon of cornstarch 5 times and you're going to get 5 different measurements each time. So that's where cornstarch is just really hard to measure consistently with a spoon. So anyway, that will really give you the best results for this recipe. And we are also going to be adding in a little bit of agar. Like I said, the diplomat cream is nothing more than a pastry cream that has been fortified with an extra thickener. In this case, it's the agar powder. And then we're going to fold in some vegan whipped cream. Additionally, we've got some vegan butter, and I'm going to be putting some vanilla extract in it at the last stage of making the custard. If you have a vanilla bean, which I've done before, go ahead and add that to the plant milk when you make the custard. So we've made this diplomat cream already. If you watched my classic Fraser cake from just a couple of weeks ago, you'll see that this is the exact same recipe that we're implementing now into this new Napoleon pastry. So it's the same recipe where we simply got the plant milk onto the stove, brought it up to a boil with the sugar and the cornstarch and the agar in there. Now I used a vanilla bean for that one. So again, if you want to do that other than the extract, by all means. You're going to then add the spot of butter at the end, and then transfer that to a large mixing bowl where we're going to just kind of like keep stirring that down to release some of the heat. You don't really want to let it set before you add in the whipped cream, otherwise you're going to have a lumpy custard, which is why I just sort of, stir it down a little bit while it's in the bowl. I do have my vegan whipped cream already whipped up and ready to go in the refrigerator, because once this custard base is ready, you're going to have to be ready with that whipped cream. So I've just lightened it up a little bit with a bit of the whipped cream, and then I'll fold in the rest. And that is how easy it is to make a diplomat cream. So this is my finished little MacGyver setup over here. So I have the acetate strips, which is really helpful when you're making a cold preparation molded dessert. This foil, I've just kind of stuck it in there to kind of give it a little bit more tightness so that there's no spaces. So it's sort of pressing in on the acetate strips. Now, is it worth really going to all of this trouble? Should I just really invest in the rectangle cake mold? I mean, I don't know. I'm MacGyver. I've always done things this way. So whichever way you do it, just be sure that you are set up and ready to go before your custard is ready, because once it's ready, we have to just pour it right in. All right, let's get this right into the freezer so it can set. We can garnish it and then slice it up. So there's really not too much to do now besides a sink full of dishes and clean the kitchen while the Napoleon cake is setting up in the freezer. We do have to make the sugar glaze. That is the classic icing for a Napoleon cake. And we're just going to make ours today with a confectioner's sugar glaze. And if you've ever worked with real fondant before, you'll know it's just like a dream. This confectioner's sugar glaze is nothing compared to that stuff. So I think at some point I'll probably get into showing you guys how to make that. But for today, this is totally fine. So I have some confectioner's sugar here in my bowl. I've added just a spot of vanilla extract and really just a tiny bit of sugar. I don't want to go too much, water. I don't want to go too much water with this because I want this icing to be really as thick as possible. If it is too thin, it's just going to be dripping all over your cake and be a literal mess. So just add the water like a teaspoon at a time. This was probably about a cup of confectioner's sugar, which is more than enough for the cake of the size that we made. So that's really super thick, but believe it or not, we don't want it to be too much thinner than that. Like literally a drop. Even that was probably too much. The other thing that I have is some melted chocolate, but it is freezing here. I think I live in Alaska now, not Florida. So my chocolate has already re-solidified. I'm gonna have to warm this up again, and then I'm going to get my Napoleon pastry out of the freezer, trim it up, and we're done. This was probably in the freezer for about an hour. It's not completely solid through, like this custard is still a little bit soft, but I'm gonna take it out and see what it looks like. I'm thinking I'm gonna have to pop it back into the freezer for a little bit longer, but let's unmold it from my MacGyver monstrosity here. So this is the example of why you would use an acetate strip and something to mold it into, like I used the loaf pan, because the custard is going to be squishing out all over the place before it's completely set. So it's just a way to keep it like all in one bag, if you will. All right, so even though it's not completely set yet, see how it's a bit jiggly? That just means the inside hasn't set up yet. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself, even though I have zero patience right now, and I want to finish this, and I want to show you guys how amazing this is so that I can also eat it. But I think if I rush it, I'm gonna really be sorry. So let me just sort of trim off the edges here though. So it looks this way, and that's okay because we're going to be garnishing it. I use toasted almonds for mine, which I think is amazing. It gives it such an amazing taste. Not to mention I already put the almond extract into the sugar, so that's sort of like a little double hit of almond. It's just really a nice taste to have that almond garnish on the outside, but if you didn't want to do that or you don't want nuts at all, you would just take that little excess puff pastry that we trimmed off in the beginning and use that as garnish. So there you go. I'm going to use that little bit of custard that I trimmed off as sort of like an icing. So I'm just gonna kind of smush that back into any cracks and crevices, and that's gonna really help stick the almonds onto the side of this cake. And now for the final almond garnish. As you see, it's quite wobbly. The custard is set. You don't want the custard to be so firm that it's rubbery. So this ratio and recipe is absolutely perfect. It's just really difficult to cut a Napoleon pastry. So when I had my bakery, we would make them in strips exactly like this and then freeze them. And then it's so much easier to cut a frozen Napoleon pastry because you could just really slice right through. And then by the time the store opened, the pastry would be already thawed out and perfectly back to creamy consistency. But I'm going to see how this goes and cut it for you on camera, because here's the other thing. If you were to make this in a cake style, like for somebody's birthday, let's say, and you're going to cut this at the table with everybody, it's kind of a nightmare. So you definitely do need a serrated knife. And you see I'm holding on to the top layer of pastry because I have to do this in like a sawing motion. Okay, the Napoleon gods are with me today. So now I'm going to grab onto the second layer and do the same thing. And you just kind of got to go for it. Once you start, don't stop. And there you go. Okay, see, it's not too bad. It's just sort of a little bit nerve-wracking. And there is my sliced Napoleon pastry. Let me get this to a plate so you can see this a little bit better. And I'm going to go ahead and dig right in on that because I've been waiting all day for this. I'll be honest, really the hardest thing about this whole thing is trying to eat it with a fork. Like, there's no way that's happening. So I pretty much just really grab it with my hands and eat it like a sandwich. But just look and listen to that flaky pastry. This vanilla diplomat cream is life, you guys. So it ends up being a total mess if you try to eat it with a fork. So I really recommend to just grab it and eat it with your fingers. If you're enjoying this Classic Cakes Veganized series here on YouTube, definitely comment below. I look forward to your suggestions for what to make next. As always, the recipes are at gretchensveganbakery.com. And just really thanks to everyone for being here and supporting the channel. And a great big shout out, as always, to my patrons on Patreon and my pals in PayPal for making all of this happen. The ingredients to pull off these recipes are not cheap, and it's because of those folks that I am able to do this. So great big round of applause for them. And if you think you can support the channel for as little as a cup of coffee a month, click the links below to find out how. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy vegan baking. Bye for now.